In a shocking case that occurred in Chicago, Illinois, in 2015, the public was stunned by the tragic death of Hugh Johnson, a successful young businessman who was murdered by his twin brother, Hayden Johnson, just before their wedding day. Deep-rooted conflict stemming from jealousy and obsession over the relationship between Hugh and his fiancée, Lindsay Mitchell, led to the tragedy. The case not only exposed psychological disorders but also revealed the dangerous boundary breaking in the homosexual relationship between the two brothers. Hayden and Hugh Johnson, born in 1987, were twin brothers raised in a well-educated family where traditional values and social norms were highly regarded. From a young age, the two had a special bond that transcended the usual connection between brothers. Growing up together, they were not only close friends but also strong spiritual support for each other in all circumstances. Both Hayden and Hugh excelled in their studies and careers, becoming successful businessmen well known in society. Outsiders often viewed them as ideal men with fulfilling lives. However, behind the curtain of that success lay a complicated relationship, a secret both had kept hidden for many years. The relationship between Hayden and Hugh was not simply brotherly. From a young age, they developed feelings that surpassed the boundaries of a normal sibling relationship. Their homosexual relationship, rare and controversial, was not only one of sharing everything in life but also of acting like a real couple. It was a relationship full of passion but also turmoil and conflict. Hayden always believed that this relationship was a natural and indispensable part of his life. He was fully immersed in those feelings, with no intention of giving them up. However, unlike Hayden, Hugh began to feel uneasy as they grew older. Hugh realized that, although the feelings between them were strong and deep, they were not in line with social norms and could cause serious psychological consequences. Hugh's mental instability became more evident as he began to feel the pressure from society and traditional moral values. He knew he could not continue living in this relationship if he wanted a normal life. The appearance of other social relationships and women in Hugh's life made him more certain that leaving Hayden was necessary. Hugh's decision was a major turning point in his life, but it was also a huge shock to Hayden. For Hayden, Hugh was not only his twin brother but also his lover, his everything. Hugh's decision to leave the relationship left Hayden feeling deeply betrayed. Jealousy, anger, and the sense of abandonment gradually drove Hayden out of control. He began to have obsessive thoughts about Hugh and was determined to keep him by his side at all costs, regardless of the consequences. Tensions between the two brothers escalated as Hugh tried to distance himself and start a new life. Hugh Johnson, initially caught up in a complicated relationship with his twin brother, gradually realized that their bond was no longer healthy. The excessive closeness between them crossed the boundaries of normal brotherly love, making Hugh feel suffocated and psychologically disturbed. He realized that if he did not end the relationship, they would continue to spiral into a vicious cycle that could lead to even more serious consequences. Determined to escape, Hugh began distancing himself from Hayden. He avoided intimate encounters and gradually cut off their dependence on each other. Hugh's decision was not only a major turning point in his personal life, but also marked the end of a complex relationship that had lasted for years. However, Hugh's change left Hayden in turmoil, unable to accept the loss of the brother he had always been so close to. Hayden's feelings of jealousy and obsession, fueled by betrayal and abandonment, caused him to lose control, leading to a series of dangerous behaviors. After deciding to escape his unhealthy relationship with Hayden, Hugh threw himself into work and new relationships, hoping that creating distance from the past would help him find peace of mind. Not long after, at a local festival, Hugh met Lindsay Mitchell, a beautiful 25-year-old woman who became the new light in his life. Lindsay attracted others not only with her appearance but also with her confidence and free-spirited lifestyle. From the moment they met, Hugh and Lindsay felt an immediate connection. This attraction was not just physical but also emotional and spiritual. After all the trauma Hugh had been through, Lindsay brought a sense of lightness, joy, and hope into his life. The two quickly became a couple, admired by everyone around them. Hugh's friends and family noticed the positive change in him from a man trapped in a troubled relationship with his brother to someone finding true happiness with Lindsay. Their relationship not only represented love, but also healing for Hugh. However, Hugh's new happiness unintentionally stirred a silent storm in Hayden's heart. Hayden, who had long considered Hugh an indispensable part of his life, began to feel the loss and jealousy as Hugh drifted away to build a new life with Lindsay. Although Hugh tried to distance himself from Hayden, he did not expect his brother to secretly watch his every move. Unable to accept the loss of the special relationship they once had, Hayden's jealousy gradually turned into an obsession. He could not accept that Hugh had found happiness with someone else, especially with a woman like Lindsay. In Hayden's mind, Lindsay was the one who had taken Hugh away from him. This fueled his negative thoughts, and his feelings of betrayal and abandonment drove Hayden to take unpredictable actions. During their 2-year relationship, Hugh and Lindsay shared many wonderful moments together. They often took walks in the parks of Chicago, where the fresh air and peaceful scenery helped them relax. On weekend afternoons, they would walk hand in hand under the sunset, sharing stories about life and dreams. These moments built a strong foundation for their love, Hugh always made an effort to create beautiful memories with Lindsay, and she felt his deep love through every little action. Their life seemed perfect, both to them and to those around them. Friends and family admired their harmony and viewed them as an ideal couple. In 2015, after 2 years together, Hugh decided to propose to Lindsay. He chose a special place, the Chicago City beach, where they had spent many holidays. As the sun began to set, Hugh knelt before Lindsay, proposing with a carefully prepared ring. Lindsay joyfully accepted, and they embraced under the brilliant sunset, overwhelmed with happiness. Soon after, they began planning their wedding, which they scheduled for August 13, 2015. They wanted their wedding to be perfect, just like the love they had nurtured. However, when Hayden Johnson learned of Hugh and Lindsay's plans to marry, his world collapsed. The news felt like an unforgivable betrayal to Hayden, who had always loved Hugh more than anyone else. The jealousy simmering within Hayden erupted into a dangerous and uncontrollable obsession. In his twisted mind, Hayden could not accept that Hugh had chosen a life with another woman, especially Lindsay. Hayden began to believe that Lindsay was the one responsible for taking Hugh away from him. This obsessive thought took root, transforming Hayden into a different person filled with anger and resentment. He could no longer think clearly, and one thought consumed him: if he couldn't have Hugh, no one could. This thought gradually turned into a cruel and vicious intention. Hayden began nurturing a plan for revenge, one that he believed would allow him to regain control and punish Hugh for betraying him. For weeks, Hayden silently watched Hugh and Lindsay's every move, pretending to accept the situation while secretly preparing for his cruel plan. On August 10, 2015, as the late night covered Chicago in an eerie quiet, a terrible crime was unfolding. Hugh Johnson, exhausted from preparing for the wedding, fell into a deep sleep. He had no idea that his life would soon be brutally taken by the brother he had trusted and loved the most. While Hugh slept, Hayden approached the house. Driven by jealousy and resentment, Hayden knew every corner of Hugh's home, so there was no need to rush or worry. He quietly entered the house, grabbed a large knife from the kitchen, and made his way to Hugh's bedroom. Without hesitation, Hayden stabbed Hugh multiple times. Startled awake by the first blow, Hugh tried to resist, but his strength quickly waned under Hayden's fierce attack. When Hayden realized Hugh still had some strength to fight back, he slashed his brother's throat, ensuring that there was no chance of survival. Hugh died within minutes. After completing his brutal act, Hayden stood still for a moment, staring at his brother's lifeless body. An indescribable emptiness filled his mind, not satisfaction but pain. Quietly, he left the house, washed the knife, and walked into the night, pretending nothing had happened. The next morning, Lindsay became worried when she couldn't reach Hugh. Her anxiety grew as she drove to his house, where she found the front door unlocked. With a sense of dread, she walked upstairs and discovered Hugh's body, covered in blood, lying motionless on the bed. In a panic, she called the police. Chicago police responded to Lindsay's frantic call and arrived at Hugh's home, which was now a crime scene. They found Hugh's lifeless body with multiple stab wounds and a slashed throat. Blood had dried on the sheets and walls, creating a gruesome scene. During the investigation, police quickly identified Hayden as the prime suspect. Using forensic technology, they collected DNA samples and fingerprints from the crime scene, confirming Hayden's involvement. Hayden was soon tracked down and arrested at a small hotel. During questioning, he calmly confessed to the murder, showing no remorse. Hayden's trial in late 2015 attracted significant media attention. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of his guilt, and despite arguments from his defense that Hayden suffered from mental illness, the court found him guilty of first-degree murder. Hayden Johnson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fate that serves as a warning about the consequences of jealousy and obsession. During the trial, the prosecution detailed how Hayden meticulously planned the murder. They explained how he had entered Hugh's house on the night of August 10th, armed with a kitchen knife, and attacked his brother while he was asleep. The forensic evidence, Hayden's fingerprints at the scene, and his confession during questioning were all presented in court, leaving no doubt about Hayden's involvement in the murder. Hayden's defense attorney tried to argue that his client was mentally disturbed and that his actions stemmed from a troubled state of mind caused by his obsessive love for his brother. They asked the court to consider this as a mitigating factor, hoping to reduce Hayden's sentence. However, the prosecution strongly argued that although Hayden may have had psychological issues, the murder was premeditated and deliberate. They stressed that Hayden had demonstrated sobriety and control in planning and executing the crime, fully understanding the consequences of his actions. After hearing the evidence, the jury quickly reached a verdict. Hayden Johnson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The court ruled that the crime was intentional and unjustifiable, driven by an unhealthy obsession and deep-rooted jealousy. Hayden was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial shocked the public not just because of the brutal nature of the crime, but also because of the disturbing and complex relationship between the twin brothers. Friends, family, and the public were left grappling with how such a tragedy could have unfolded, questioning what led Hayden to such extreme actions. In the aftermath, the story of Hugh and Hayden Johnson became a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession and the devastating impact of unchecked emotions. Hugh, a successful businessman and a loving partner, lost his life to the twisted love of his twin brother. Hayden, once a promising young man, now faced a lifetime behind bars, his life forever tied to the consequences of his actions. Hugh's fiancée, Lindsay, was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. The grief of losing her future husband in such a violent way weighed heavily on her. She had witnessed the horrifying aftermath and would forever be haunted by the memories of that day. Hayden's conviction brought some closure to the case, but the tragic story of the Johnson brothers continues to resonate as a dark chapter in Chicago's true crime history. The case serves as a reminder of the thin line between love and obsession, and how dangerous it can be when that line is crossed. In the years following the trial, the community remained haunted by the events that led to the murder. The Johnson family, who had once been the picture of success and unity, was torn apart by the actions of one brother against the other. The story of Hugh and Hayden Johnson continues to be studied and discussed by those interested in the psychology behind such crimes, serving as a stark example of how love, jealousy, and obsession can intertwine in the most destructive of ways. After the trial concluded, the media continued to focus on the shocking nature of the case. Documentaries and interviews with experts analyzed the psychological dynamics between the twin brothers, attempting to understand the complexities that led Hayden to murder his brother. Psychologists and criminal experts speculated that Hayden had long suffered from a deep-seated emotional dependency on Hugh, which, when combined with an obsessive personality, eventually spiraled into violence. The Johnson family, once considered an example of success and high standing, was left devastated. Hugh's parents, close friends, and relatives struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. They had always viewed the bond between the twins as a strong and inseparable connection, never imagining that it could result in such a horrific ending. Lindsay Mitchell, Hugh's fiancée, faced an unbearable future. She had gone from planning a wedding to attending her fiance's funeral in the blink of an eye. The trauma of finding Hugh's lifeless body and the harrowing details of the murder left her emotionally scarred. She later spoke publicly about the impact the tragedy had on her life, urging others to recognize warning signs of unhealthy relationships and the importance of mental health awareness. For the public, the case of Hayden and Hugh Johnson became infamous, not just for the brutality of the murder, but for the taboo elements that surfaced during the investigation. The homosexual relationship between the two brothers shocked many, as such dynamics were rarely discussed openly, especially within families that seemed outwardly traditional and successful. Public opinion was divided, with some focusing on the moral implications of their relationship, while others were horrified by the extreme lengths Hayden went to in order to maintain control over his brother. As the years passed, the tragic story of the Johnson twins continued to serve as a grim reminder of the dangers of obsession, control, and psychological instability. Hayden, sentenced to life in prison, remained largely silent after his conviction. His case was occasionally revisited in true crime circles, where experts analyzed the intersection of familial relationships, mental illness, and violent crime. Hugh's memory, however, was kept alive by those who knew him best. His friends and family remembered him as a kind, successful, and loving individual who, despite his personal struggles, was on the path to creating a fulfilling life with Lindsay. His legacy lived on as a cautionary tale, one that showed how even the closest of relationships could hide dark and dangerous secrets. In prison, Hayden was reportedly isolated, both physically and emotionally. The sense of guilt and emptiness that had overwhelmed him after the murder seemed to follow him behind bars. Despite his cold demeanor during the trial, there were reports from prison staff and psychologists that suggested Hayden had moments of deep regret. Though he never publicly expressed remorse for his actions, his life, once full of promise, had been reduced to the cold confinement of a prison cell, where he would spend the rest of his days reflecting on the choices that led him to take his brother's life. For those who followed the case, the Johnson brothers' story stood as a disturbing example of how unchecked emotions, obsession, and a refusal to confront personal issues can lead to unimaginable tragedy. The deadly relationship between Hayden and Hugh Johnson remains one of the most haunting cases in Chicago's true crime history, a grim reminder of the thin line between love and destruction. Psychological and societal reflections. In the wake of Hayden Johnson's trial, psychologists and forensic experts sought to analyze the deeper psychological issues that had led to such a disturbing and violent outcome. Many speculated that Hayden's obsessive love for his brother was rooted in early emotional dependency, which gradually transformed into an unhealthy fixation. The dynamics between twins can be incredibly complex, as they often share an intimate connection from birth. But in this case, the emotional bond between Hayden and Hugh transcended typical sibling relationships, evolving into a romantic and codependent attachment. Experts argued that Hayden's inability to separate his identity from Hugh's led to his downfall. From childhood, the brothers had been inseparable, and as they matured, Hayden found himself unable to form healthy relationships outside of the one he had with Hugh, when Hugh began to establish a life independent of Hayden, particularly with Lindsay. Hayden perceived it not only as a rejection but as a personal attack on the very foundation of his existence. This type of psychological breakdown, often fueled by jealousy and obsession, is not uncommon in cases where extreme emotional dependency is present. According to mental health professionals, Hayden likely suffered from undiagnosed personality disorders, such as borderline personality disorder or obsessive-compulsive disorder, both of which can cause individuals to experience heightened emotions, particularly around relationships. Hayden's increasingly erratic behavior in the months leading up to the murder is consistent with this kind of psychological instability. During interviews conducted after the trial, forensic psychologists emphasized the dangerous combination of jealousy, abandonment issues, and romantic obsession that played a role in the crime. Hayden's inability to cope with the reality of Hugh's engagement and impending marriage drove him to the belief that the only way to regain control over his life and Hugh's was through violence. The obsessive thought, "If I can't have him, no one can," became the mantra that ultimately led to his fatal decision. Media sensation and public reaction. The media frenzy surrounding the case was intense, and it wasn't just the brutality of the crime that captured public attention. The taboo nature of the relationship between the twin brothers, a homosexual relationship, added an extra layer of controversy to an already shocking case. In a society that still harbored deep-rooted stigmas around same-sex relationships, the revelation that the brothers had been involved in a romantic and sexual relationship made the story even more sensational. True crime enthusiasts, journalists, and psychologists debated whether the brothers' relationship was the result of repressed desires or psychological disorders. Some argued that the case exemplified the darker aspects of sibling relationships, particularly among twins, where boundaries are often more blurred. Others focused on the broader societal issues, pointing out how the lack of open conversations around sexuality and mental health may have contributed to Hayden's inability to process his feelings in a healthy way. The case also sparked discussions about the role of societal pressure and traditional family values in shaping the lives of individuals who don't conform to conventional norms. Both brothers had been raised in a family that upheld strong traditional values, which may have contributed to their internal struggles. Hugh's attempt to break away and lead a socially acceptable life with Lindsay, contrasted with Hayden's inability to let go of the relationship, symbolized the tragic clash between societal expectations and personal identity. The long-term impact on Lindsay Mitchell. Lindsay Mitchell, the woman caught in the middle of this tragic love triangle, became a symbol of resilience for many who followed the case. In the immediate aftermath of Hugh's murder, Lindsay struggled with immense grief and trauma. Finding her fiancé's lifeless body had left her deeply scarred, both emotionally and psychologically. In interviews given years later, Lindsay reflected on the challenges she faced in rebuilding her life after such a harrowing experience. She spoke openly about her struggles with PTSD, anxiety, and the overwhelming sense of guilt she felt, despite being an innocent bystander in the tragic events. Lindsay's public advocacy for mental health awareness became an important part of her healing process. She often spoke about the importance of recognizing early warning signs in relationships and seeking help before situations spiral out of control. Her story resonated with many people who had experienced similar tragedies, and she became a prominent voice in discussions about the long-term effects of trauma and the importance of therapy and support. In the years following the trial, Lindsay worked closely with organizations that support victims of violent crime, using her platform to help others who had lost loved ones to senseless violence. Societal lessons and true crime discussions. The case of the Johnson brothers sparked broader discussions about the intersection of mental health, obsession, and violence in true crime communities. Many pointed out that while the case was extreme, it highlighted the importance of early intervention in preventing tragedies. Psychologists emphasized that if Hayden's obsessive tendencies had been recognized and addressed sooner through therapy or other forms of intervention, it might have prevented the crime. For true crime enthusiasts, the story became a case study in understanding how seemingly successful individuals with deep psychological wounds can be driven to commit horrific acts. It also underscored the importance of recognizing unhealthy dynamics in close relationships, particularly when those dynamics involve intense emotional or romantic feelings. The Johnson brothers' case continues to be a topic of discussion in true crime media, podcasts, and documentaries, as it presents a chilling example of how love and obsession, when left unchecked, can lead to devastating consequences. It serves as a reminder that behind even the closest bonds, hidden tensions and unresolved emotions can fester and ultimately erupt into tragedy. The legacy of the Johnson brothers. As time passed, the Johnson family and those close to them tried to move on from the tragedy, though the scars left by the events of 2015 would never fully heal. The family, once admired for their success and unity, remained fractured. The case left an indelible mark on the Chicago community, where it became one of the city's most infamous true crime stories. The story of Hayden and Hugh Johnson continues to resonate, not only as a dark chapter in the annals of true crime, but as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unresolved emotional conflicts and the destructive power of obsession. For those who study the psychology of crime, the case remains a chilling reminder that even the most outwardly successful lives can hide deep and dangerous secrets.